我们继续跟波兰台北办事处的梅西亚处长来谈他在台湾的这4年半的感触。Director General, I was told that you were trained first as an academician. You got your PhD from study about China, and later on you become a diplomat. I'm a kind of curious why this kind of transformation. I mean, are you still miss your job doing the study as an academic, and how do you see the angle when you are working as a diplomat?
Oh, thank you for this, in fact, very personal question. Well, there are moments in my work now that I am really missing my academic experience. But on the other hand, being a diplomat gives you, in a due time, the feedback mostly about the rightfulness of your movement, or whether you are doing any mistakes, or whether anything is to be improved in a very short time. And of course, it's all in the context of constantly changing, fast changing political environment, economical environment, and social issues. While academic approach is always more steady and there's more time for any reflection. Yeah, generally speaking, of course, the problem is now that as we have shrinking spatial and temporal reality, there is no even time to have an in-depth analysis of whatever. And then our minds, our brains are working toward the selection of some most important issues, right? Still, advantage of being an academician is that you can have a comfort of concentrating on one or another subject for a longer time perspective. Well, China is in the loop of my interest for 30 years now. And of course, my understanding of China is changing constantly. From being a young student that had a great chance to go to study in Beijing University in 1990, fascinated with anything around me. Then followed by a more mature approach, and of course, to some extent, some sort of a criticism, what I'm observing, and then completely new angle by having a great opportunity, a chance to be posted here in Taiwan.
Your specialty is on studying Naxi's language and culture, and along with it, China's approach or policy toward those minority. And do you think that had any implication for the current situation that you are watching right now? Is there any connection to that?
Well, in fact, my research was mostly on what is called in Chinese language in mainland China, 中国少数民族, so the national minorities in mainland China. And even from that perspective, you can see the huge difference in approach between China and Taiwan, because here you use the term Yuan Zumin, Yuan Zumin, the Aboriginal people, and still this term is not, widely acclaimed and accepted in China towards the national minorities or Aborigines living in this vast area. What I see is, of course, in the history of China, the approach to Aboriginal people living in China didn't change much. It's always a position of the majority against minorities. While looking into the constitution of PRC, you can find out that the laws or there is some space that is secured by the constitution, while the reality is different from it, very different. We can observe even now in the 21st century some atrocities that are happening there, right? We need to talk more. We need to engage as an international community to what's going on now with the Xinjiang region, with the Uyghur people. We cannot forget about Tibet and Tibetan people and their situation. And there are many, many other groups. What I see is that the real politics, real policies and the implementation of real policies toward aborigines in Taiwan reflect completely different approach from what we can observe in mainland China. Of course, with a wider perspective, I can see the reasons of some moves by the government, but from the perspective of these groups, of course, I have completely different judgment of what's going on there.
I'd like to move the topic to the rise of China. It's somewhat related with the previous question that the rise of China, everyone see that in a different perspective. Some see it as a global threat, that this rise of China would try to disrupt the international order and so on and so forth. But other people, some in the developing country, they see it more as an alternative way for development, that it's a way that is not asking this particular country to change what they have been doing all along. China will not try to interfere with their domestic affairs, providing aid without asking questions, so on and so forth. How do you see that?
It's complicated. Well, and it's a broad question. Just to limit to politics and society, culture and society are constantly changing, and we can see some similarities between ancient and modern China. So social classes, excluding some episodes in China's history, are prevalent in China. The difference is now that whereas in the past the social position was pretty much ascribed to a person, the moment one was born. Nowadays it is possible to negotiate one's social status and climb a social ladder, right? So this is advantage, this is sort of achievement. In terms of the political system, China went from the feudal system through the ruling by imperial house to ruling by a single communist party. And during the PRC time, the control is extended. And this is one of my concerns, because historically, the ancient China ruled to the county level and relied mainly on the gentry, as they took over the control of the society on the county and lower levels. For now, the control by the PRC government is going onto the streets, and it's permanent with the new tech facial recognition system and awards for some attitude for the society. It goes much further, and the terms not of sort of a trust that was a role model for many thousands years in China. As we know, the gentry was so important, but that was a sort of unspoken trust in between the emperor and the gentry. They were taking care of the local communities, while now the system, the so well working system of mutual or many level trust was changed for a full centralized control. So if I have on the wage the society built on the idea of the trust, mutual trust, and on the other hand, the society built on the system of centralized control, my choice is obvious.
This happened in Chinese domestic environment, but how do you see that in terms of international system right now? I mean, is China doing the bullying on other countries, just like it had done in their domestic environment, or you are seeing they may be changing and try to modify their behavior according to international order?
Well, definitely. I mean, two things to be said. As a diplomat, as an European diplomat, I need to admit that just recently, European Commission published a paper described China as a systemic rival and economic competitor. So therefore, we are fully aware of the nature of the regime in China. We also remember that in the last 40 years, China achieved a remarkable economic success, getting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. However, the current trends in China are deeply worrying. So, as I said, the human rights situation in Xinjiang and in Tibet cannot be ignored by the international community. So, from the perspective of Western societies, the so-called China model is not attractive at all. Yes, I firmly believe that the future of humankind lies in peaceful cooperation of societies and countries sharing the same or similar understanding of some common values. So still it's freedom of speech, access to education, free education, democratic order. So these are the common values. And I know that the model, the Chinese model, is somehow attractive to some of the countries around the globe. But as I said, from our perspective as European countries, we do not see it as a role model for the future. Because what we are looking for is always a sort of equal approach. And we are aware of some very ambitious projects like Belt and Road, like AIIB, and many others. And we wish this project could work well. But on the other hand, we have our own observations, and somehow we created in Europe a counter-proposal to Belt and Road, which is framed within the EU-Asia connectivity, where we implemented the values that I was talking about before. So sharing economy, the access of the countries involved, equal access for the benefits of the investment in any projects. Because still what we observe with Chinese investment abroad, there are a lot of concerns about loans, about about building up this sort of dependent economies. Our approach is different. We want to build more shared economy approach all around the world. And we do hope that this is much more attractive model than one offered by your neighbors through the cross-strait.
You work in China and now you are in Taiwan. Of course, you are aware that China have always said with the nationalist sentiment saying that they're going to unify Taiwan. And you are in Taiwan also, you know what the Taiwanese have been thinking about this issue. So what will happen in the future between Taiwan and China? China has become bigger and bigger with very aggressive attitude. And how should both sides can talk its way out of this, or is it going to be unified by force, which is going to be a tragedy for all of us?
Well, this is a question that cannot be really answered, because if you ask me what will be the future, what can I say? I can only say about my hopes, about my wishes for it. Of course, but what is important in your question is that you say that Taiwan is somehow resistant to this idea of a unification. Whenever you use the term in such a fragile subject or sensitive subject like China and Taiwan, still we need to keep in our mind that there are many opinions about it within the societies. So even in Taiwan, I met people with very different opinion concerning unifying with China or heading for the full independence. Many different opinions. I still remember being back in China that there were people with many opinions as well. So why I gave this remark is that the relations, in my opinion, should be maintained according to the internal consensus and on the mutual trust stated by the different parties or shareholders in Taiwan. What's very important is to have one voice for the outer world. And it has all to be within the legal frames. So once we have the Republic of China Taiwan with its own constitution, it has to be in accordance with the constitutional law. I think that there are not other options like peaceful cooperation in future. I have my reservation. I am pretty sure that there will be no any aggressive approach. If there is any war, the war is already here now. It's war of words. It's war of narrations. And the war of narrations, it's really aggressive. And because China has experience that with sort of aggressive narration, it can build, more convincing picture of its rights in the global societies. It worked in favor of the Chinese perspective in many different models or historical approach. But that's why it is very important that Taiwan is keeping on and even more extensively, more aggressively talking about the values which are so unique and which created the success of Taiwan. Common values, as I said, in terms that is understood by Western world. So democratic order, human rights, freedom of speech, this is very important. Then, going back to Chinese culture, which is still deeply rooted on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, and talk about people and societies. At the end, on both sides, people are afraid of one thing, disorder. And people will do everything to avoid it. And none of the single politicians on both sides will have a right to make decision that could lead to the unprecedented events. And looking into it from the philosophical point of view, or even taking into consideration Sun Tzu and his remarkable book from the many thousands years or many hundreds years ago, war is something that you always will avoid. Yes. Because war means losing the resources, any sort of resources. And I think on both sides there is a common ground of understanding because of the cultural backbone. No one is leading to it. It's a war of narration only.
Thank you very much, Director General, for your thought, and hope you have a safe trip home, and hope to see you back again in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you as well.
谢谢各位收看，我们下次见。